Some challenges are thrown as jokes. Some are born from arrogance, but sometimes destiny hides inside them. Today's story isn't about money, power, or prestige. It's about respect, dignity, and a truth buried in the past. Stay with me because this one ends in a way no one saw coming. Before we begin, tell us where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Your every comment, gift, and membership helps us bring more heart-touching stories to your life. The rooftop party glittered under the Los Angeles skyline. Champagne flutes clinked. Laughter spilled across the polished tiles, and a private helicopter gleamed under the floodlights. At the center of it all stood Vanessa Marlowe, CEO of Skyward Industries. Tall, confident, flawless in her designer dress, she held an audience with ease. Her empire was aviation tech, yet her arrogance often outflew her machines. When her eyes landed on a man by the bar, broad shoulders, worn leather jacket, a faint scar running across his jaw, she smirked. His name was Mason Holt. Few knew much about him, only that he worked as a security consultant for the event. Lifting her glass, Vanessa mocked with a laugh that sliced the air. "Tell you what, Holt, fly that chopper parked on my helipad. Land it smooth. Do it and I'll marry you on the spot," the crowd roared. To them it was a joke. To Mason it was a wound reopened. The laughter ricocheted around Mason like bullets. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't even smirk. Instead, his hand traced the rim of his glass, eyes steady, jaw locked in silence. To most, he was just a hired guard, broad-shouldered muscle in a fading jacket. But inside, a storm brewed. The helicopter's blades caught the light, pulling him backward in time. The roar of engines, the desert sun, the brothers beside him, all ghosts now. He took a breath, grounding himself in the present. Vanessa, sensing no comeback, twirled her hair and leaned into the crowd. "Didn't think so. Maybe stick to guarding doors, big guy." More laughter, more smirks. Yet one woman, an assistant pouring drinks, noticed Mason's knuckles whiten around the glass. She tilted her head. Who was this man who didn't bite back? The music thundered on. The joke dissolved into the night. But for Mason, something had been set in motion. A fuse quietly burning toward a truth no one expected. Vanessa Marlowe was no stranger to control. At 38, she had clawed her way through a male-dominated industry, building Skyward Industries into a billion-dollar empire. She wore confidence like armor, her boardroom victories celebrated in magazines. To her, the world was a chessboard, and people pieces. Her rooftop parties were her stage, designed to showcase wealth and power. Celebrities mingled, investors shook hands, and she thrived in their admiration. Yet beneath the glamour lay a hunger to prove she could conquer anything, anyone. That night, mocking Mason had been entertainment. To Vanessa, he was background noise, another nameless face among the hired staff. The helicopter challenge, just a quip, a way to show dominance. She never paused to ask who he really was, because if she had, she might have seen the way his eyes scanned the horizon like a soldier, the precision in his stance, the quiet authority that didn't need words. Vanessa believed she held the power, but the truth was far older, carved in scars Mason never spoke of. By day, Mason Holt worked quiet jobs, security details, private consulting, the kind of roles that kept him out of the spotlight. To neighbors, he was the guy who fixed his own motorcycle in the driveway, nodded politely at the grocery store, and kept to himself. But there was a history no one in that rooftop crowd knew. Years ago, Mason had been part of the 509th Airborne Battalion, one of the Army's top helicopter units. Combat zones, rescue missions, skies that could kill a man twice before he hit the ground, that had been his life. When he came home, broken and restless, it wasn't Wall Street or golf clubs that gave him belonging. It was the brotherhood of a motorcycle club, men who didn't flinch at scars, men who understood silence. He found family in their rides, healing in their loyalty, and though Mason never boasted, within those circles he carried a title whispered with respect: the Hawk, their top pilot, their guardian in the sky. Morning spilled across Los Angeles, but the sting of Vanessa's mockery lingered. Mason sat on his porch, sipping black coffee, the hum of traffic below. He should have brushed it off. Another CEO's arrogance, nothing new. Yet it gnawed at him. Not the words, but the eyes that watched. That crowd hadn't seen him as a man. They'd seen muscle, disposable, less than. And though he'd long abandoned the need to prove himself, something about her challenge echoed deeper. His brothers noticed too. That afternoon at the Lions MC garage, engines roared while Mason leaned against the wall. Jax, his oldest friend, clapped him on the back. "Words out, Hawk. That CEO made you a punchline. You gonna let that ride?" Mason exhaled, eyes distant. "Not about pride. It's about something else, and what's that?" Jax asked. Mason stared at the sky. Sometimes people forget respect is heavier than money, and heavier things have a way of falling hard. The seed of decision had been planted. Meanwhile, Vanessa relished the aftermath. Photos from the rooftop had circulated, comments pouring in about her wit and boldness. She smirked, scrolling through headlines. CEO throws wild helicopter challenge. To her, Mason was already forgotten, just part of the spectacle. But her assistant Clara hesitated at her desk. She had seen Mason's eyes that night. Not embarrassment, not fear. "Something else, Ms. Marlowe," Clara ventured. "Don't you think he might, you know, take the challenge seriously?" Vanessa laughed. "Please, that man's no pilot. He probably can't even spell helicopter." Clara didn't answer. She just remembered the steadiness in Mason's silence, the way soldiers look at storms. That weekend, Vanessa invited more investors to her private airfield, turning the Mockery into an unofficial bet. "If the big guy shows up, we'll make it a show. If not, I'll prove what I already know, that some people just don't belong in my world." But storms rarely wait for permission to arrive. Back at the MC garage, Mason stood before his brothers, the low rumble of bikes surrounding him. He explained Vanessa's bet, her words, the crowd's laughter. Some chuckled, ready to dismiss it. Others clenched their fists. "You gonna show her?" Jax asked. Mason hesitated. He wasn't a man who sought revenge. Years in war had taught him the cost of proving points. But this wasn't about ego, it was about truth. A reminder that worth wasn't measured in dollars or titles. Finally he spoke. "I'll fly." The room stilled. Then nods followed. These men knew his story, the hundreds of missions he'd flown. They knew what Vanessa didn't, that helicopters were as natural to Mason as breathing. "You want backup?" Jax asked. Mason shook his head. No crowd. No spectacle. Just her and the sky. But as he spoke, the club roared approval. Because when one of their own carried dignity on his shoulders, they carried it too. The afternoon sun blazed over Marlowe Airfield. Luxury cars lined the runway, investors in sunglasses sipping cocktails under tents. At the center, the sleek helicopter gleamed, paint-polished blades waiting. Vanessa strutted across the tarmac in tailored white, every step a performance. "If he even shows," she told a hedge fund partner, "this will be quick." Then came the sound no one expected. Motorcycles. Dozens of them, engines roaring like thunder, leather jackets flashing patches. The Lions MC rolled in, flanking Mason like an army. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The contrast was stark. Tailored suits on one side, weathered bikers on the other. Vanessa froze, her smirk faltering for the first time. Mason dismounted, calm as ever, boots crunching against the gravel. His eyes never left the helicopter. "Afternoon," he said evenly. "I'll take that bet." The airfield went silent, the weight of his words hanging heavier than the chopper itself. Vanessa recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "You're serious? Fine, let's make it interesting." She gestured to the crowd. "If you crash, you walk away for good. No excuses." Mason gave a small nod. "Deal." But as he approached the helicopter, whispers broke out. "Does he even know the controls?" "He'll kill himself." This is madness. Even Clara, watching from the sidelines, felt her heart race. Mason moved with quiet certainty, running his hand across the frame, checking details like second nature. Yet to the untrained eye it looked like hesitation. Vanessa crossed her arms, smirking again. Still time to back out, cowboy. Mason climbed into the cockpit, the door shutting with a metallic thud. For a long moment, silence. Then the ignition whined, blades beginning to spin. The crowd held its breath as the machine roared to life, dust spiraling. What they didn't know. This wasn't the first time Mason had answered a challenge with his life on the line. The rotor blades blurred into a storm, kicking wind across the tarmac. Mason's hands moved with precision. Switches, gauges, throttle, all muscle memory etched from years of combat. The helicopter shuddered, lifted, then steadied, rising gracefully into the sky. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Some clapped nervously, others muttered disbelief. Vanessa's smirk faltered again. She had expected fumbling, panic, maybe even disaster. But the man in the cockpit moved like he belonged there. The helicopter hovered, then tilted into a controlled arc circling the airfield. Mason kept it steady, smooth as silk. Sunlight glinted across the windshield, catching the faintest smile on his lips. Below, the Lion's MC cheered, engines revving in solidarity. Investors exchanged stunned looks. Even Clara whispered, "He's not just flying, he's performing." When Mason guided the chopper into a hover directly above Vanessa, dust swirling around her heels, the truth began to dawn. This was no accident. This was mastery. For the first time in years, Vanessa felt something foreign, doubt. Her carefully curated confidence cracked as she stared at the machine above her, blades whipping the air. She tried to laugh, brushing it off. "Beginner's luck," she muttered, but her voice trembled. The helicopter descended smoothly, touching the runway like a feather. Mason stepped out, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes calm. No victory speech, no boast, just presence. "Where'd you learn that?" Vanessa demanded, her tone sharper than intended. Mason's gaze held hers, unflinching, in places where mistakes cost lives. "Not applause," the crowd murmured. Something about his words shifted the air, piercing the glamour of the event. Vanessa swallowed, but pride pushed her forward. Anyone can land once. Try a real maneuver. Prove it wasn't luck. Mason studied her, then nodded. "Your sky, your rules." The second test was set. Only this time it wouldn't be doubt that broke her. It would be truth. Vanessa's investors gathered closer, sensing drama. "Show us something real," she called, chin high, though her heart pounded. "A barrel turn. A hover pivot. Something that proves you're not bluffing." Mason didn't argue. He strapped back in, the rotors screaming once more. The helicopter lifted, rose higher, then banked sharply. Gasps tore through the crowd as the machine spun into a flawless barrel turn, leveling in perfect balance. Then came the hover pivot, swinging nose first toward the crowd before stopping on a dime, steady as stone. The MC brothers roared approval, engines echoing in thunderous rhythm. Vanessa's mask of arrogance cracked further. Investors stared at her, murmuring questions she couldn't answer. Clara's eyes brimmed with something closer to awe. When Mason landed again, dust settling like ashes, silence followed. He stepped out, helmet in hand, meeting Vanessa's gaze. "No bluff," he said simply, and in that moment, she realized the joke she'd made had just unraveled her carefully woven image. Clara, trembling, whispered to one of the investors, "He's not just good. He's trained." "Military, maybe." The words rippled through the crowd. Soon murmurs grew into questions. Who is he really? What's his story? Vanessa tried to laugh it off, but the ground beneath her confidence shifted. Mason didn't move, didn't demand. He simply stood, his silence heavier than any speech. Finally, Jack stepped forward from the MC, voice carrying across the airfield. "You asked him to fly? You mocked him. You should know who you're talking to. That man's called the Hawk. Hundreds of missions, lives saved in deserts and storms. When others broke, he flew. Gasps erupted. Vanessa's jaw tightened, eyes darting between her guests. This wasn't the story she had planned. Mason only said quietly, "Titles don't matter. Respect does." And with that, the truth she had buried under mockery rose higher than her entire empire. The investors shifted uneasily, some exchanging looks of disapproval. Vanessa's empire thrived on image, yet her arrogance had now backfired in public. She had mocked a veteran, a man who carried more honor in silence than she did in speeches. She tried to salvage control. "Fine, you flew, impressive, but marriage, that was a joke. No one takes it seriously." But her voice cracked under the weight of scrutiny. People weren't laughing anymore. They were watching her, judging her. Mason's expression never changed. He didn't want her hand nor her approval, but something in the crowd's shifting eyes told her she'd already lost more than pride. Clara stepped forward, voice gentle but firm. "Respect isn't a game, Miss Marlowe. You mocked a man you didn't understand, and now everyone sees it." The silence after her words was sharper than any blade. Vanessa stood cornered by truth, her empire's glitter dimmed. Mason turned to leave, helmet tucked under his arm, boots steady against the gravel. He had nothing left to prove. His brothers mounted their bikes, engines rumbling in solidarity. But before he stepped away, he paused. His voice, low but clear, carried across the tarmac. "You wanted to laugh at someone. Fine. But remember this. Respect is the only currency that holds value when everything else burns." Then he walked past Vanessa, past the investors, past the fragile empire she clung to. The lions roared their engines, parting the crowd like a tide, and together they rolled out. For the first time, Vanessa had no words. Her power, her armor, her stage, all stripped by the quiet dignity of a man who didn't need applause. And as the dust settled, the echo of his words lingered heavier than the whir of blades. That evening, the rooftop lights of Vanessa's world felt dimmer. Investors had left early, their polite handshakes stiff. Clara moved silently through the office, packing files. Vanessa sat alone, staring at her reflection in the glass. For the first time, she saw cracks. She had built her empire on dominance, but now dominance felt hollow. She thought of Mason's eyes, not angry, not triumphant, just steady. She thought of the way the bikers rallied around him, not out of fear, but out of respect. Something she had never truly known. For years, she'd believed respect came from control. But Mason had shown her it came from something else. Truth, loyalty, sacrifice, and though she would never admit it aloud, she realized she had been humbled not by humiliation, but by revelation, the kind that changes people, if they let it. Mason returned to his small home, the hum of engines fading behind him. He set the helmet on the table, poured himself black coffee, and sat in silence. To him, the day wasn't victory. It was a memory. He thought of brothers who never came home, of skies that swallowed names the world would never know. Flying wasn't about proving himself to a CEO. It was about honoring them. Jack stopped by, leaning against the porch. "You shook her world, Hawk," Mason shrugged. "Not my intention. Sometimes truth has a way of showing up when you least expect it." Jack smiled faintly. "Still, you reminded people." "Reminded her. Respect isn't bought." "It's earned," Mason nodded. Outside, the sky deepened, painted with streaks of fading light. For a man who had once lived in war, this silence was his peace, and that was enough. Days later, Vanessa appeared at the Lions MC garage, stepping nervously among the rows of bikes. The brothers stiffened, but Mason only raised a brow. She cleared her throat. "I owe you an apology." Her voice wavered, but sincerity flickered beneath it. "I mocked you. I mocked what I didn't understand. And I saw the way they stood for you. That kind of respect, I've never earned it. But I want to learn." The garage fell silent. Jax exchanged a look with Mason, who studied her carefully. Finally, he spoke. "Respect isn't a trophy. It's built in small choices, every day. You want it? Start there. Vanessa nodded slowly, humbled in a way she'd never known. She wasn't forgiven overnight, but the seed of change had been planted, and sometimes that's where redemption begins. Weeks passed. Vanessa didn't host parties. Instead, she spent mornings at the airfield, watching pilots train, asking questions, listening instead of boasting. Clara noticed the change. One afternoon, Mason arrived quiet as always. Vanessa approached him, not with arrogance but with respect. "I don't want to prove anything anymore," she said. "I just want to understand what flying means to you." Mason studied her, then gestured toward the horizon. "Flying isn't about control. It's about trust. With the machine, with yourself, with the sky. The moment you forget that, you fall." She nodded, letting the words settle. For the first time, she wasn't Vanessa, the CEO. She was simply a student, learning from a man whose truths were written in scars and silence. And though they would never be husband and wife, the bond forged that day was stronger than mockery. It was respect. Months later, Skyward Industries released a new initiative, funding flight scholarships for veterans returning home. The press praised Vanessa's vision, but those who knew the story understood it wasn't about vision at all. It was about transformation. At the ceremony, Mason stood at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed, content. When Vanessa spoke, she paused briefly, eyes flicking toward him. Not for applause, but for acknowledgement. "Respect," she said softly into the microphone, "isn't about titles or wealth. It's about those who gave everything, and those who never stopped carrying them in silence." Mason slipped away before the cameras turned. Back on his porch, he watched the sky darken, a faint smile ghosting his lips. The world might never know the hawk, but he didn't need them to, because respect, once earned, never needs an audience. Some stories remind us that real strength isn't loud, it's steady. Mason didn't seek revenge, applause, or reward. He carried truth, and truth carried him. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from?